people don't realise this, but the geek to hipster pipeline is a very real thing, and it's very easy to be a geeky hipster or a hip geek.
Flynn's Arcade.
Hi, this is Flynn's Arcade, and this is part 1 of my Scott Pilgrim video. Please do me a favour and like, share and subscribe. This video is about Scott Pilgrim, and it's about the extended Scott Pilgrim universe, which takes place in the film Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, the graphic novels, and the recent web series, the recent mini-series Scott Pilgrim Takes Off. The reason why I'm making this video is I actually spent a lot of time on YouTube. I'm just constantly watching video essays, and well, really watching isn't really true. I like to listen to them when I'm working. And I remember a few weeks ago I watched a video, and it was a video essay about quite a few different films. It was just like a compilation video essay, and I saw that a person had commented like, I hated Scott Pilgrim because it has such a terrible message. And I looked at the comment. I didn't really know what the person meant, and I thought about actually asking them, but I just thought that is not going to go well, because I know what people are like. It's like I really have a real aversion to arguing on the internet nowadays. I have a long history of getting into internet arguments, and I just decided, a while ago, to just try and avoid them wherever possible. And I just have a feeling that if I'd have actually asked them what they meant, then it would have kicked off, and I was supposed to be working, so I just decided not to. But it really preyed on my mind. The comment, so I just couldn't stop thinking about it on and off over a few weeks about, what did they mean? I mean, is there a message in Scott Pilgrim? And is it terrible? So I thought I'd go off and investigate, and this is what I've come up with. I'm going to talk about the three, Scott Pilgrim pieces that I've mentioned, but and I'm going to kind of use them fairly interchangeably throughout, and also, at this point, this is your last chance. This is a spoiler warning, and it's quite a big one. If you've not seen the mini-series, then please go and watch that before you watch this. And it's quite new, so there's quite a strong chance that you won't have seen it. And so, I will ruin it for you, because I'm just about to drop a bombshell on you, so just save this video and watch it later. Anyway, I've done it now. This is the bombshell. Scott is barely in the mini-series. He just, he dies in the first episode, and that is just... It was such a brilliant twist, because it's just getting rid of the main character. It's like I always thought the old Christmas film It's a Wonderful Life. I always had a massive problem with the concept of that film, because the whole concept is how the incidental actions that we take in life all have effects on everyone, and things would be so much worse if this person had never existed. But the obvious message of that is if it's worse because of this person not existing, then surely there's some people, the world would be much better if they didn't exist. That's it. It's obvious, if that's the universe we're living in, that's the next logical step. And Scott Pilgrim Takes Off really investigates that. It actually goes through what happens without Scott being there, and I think it's an absolute power move. And another thing that's worth mentioning whilst I'm thinking about that is that you notice I'm wearing Scott's Zero t-shirt. Scott is obviously a Smashing Pumpkins fan. I mean, there's a couple of Smashing Pumpkins references in the graphic novel especially, but I feel that Zero is far more symbolic than that. I think it has a relationship with Ramona's evil exes and how he's not one of them, but also, or that he could become one. But one thing though is it's Scott as a human being, he's like a blank anyway. He very rarely he has no sort of sense of agency over his own life. He's really lacks common sense. I mean, there's one scene where his flatmate Wallace has to phone him up to tell him that there's a heat wave, and he has to go into somewhere with air conditioning, because otherwise he'll probably get heat stroke and die. I mean, he's 23 and he can't even make decisions like that on his own. I mean, that's quite very problematic. And so I think Scott, he doesn't even exist in his own life. So to actually have a mini-series where he completely doesn't exist at all through most of it. I just think it was just really smart, and it's just sort of quite an interesting take on the unlikable protagonist that Scott is. When I started to think about Scott Pilgrim, and I was trying to think about when I decided not to get into the argument in the YouTube comments, and I decided to just go off and think about what the problematic messaging could be, I thought about my own relationship with the Scott Pilgrim series. And it's very easy to think, when you like something. I absolutely love Scott Pilgrim, but you look at Medium and you'll say with complete rose-tinted glasses. Basically, it's like you'll think, oh yeah, Scott Pilgrim's great. I've always loved it, but actually, my relationship with it is a lot more complex than that. When I came to think about it, for example, I only saw the film for the first time about 3 years ago. And watched it just because it was lockdown, and I'd watch anything that looked like was entertaining, and so I'd just stick things on. I was just constantly watching films. I remember the film coming out. I was aware of it when it came out, and so obviously, I'm a Venture Brothers fan, and I'm into Final Fantasy and stuff like that, so I was very aware of the film coming out. But I didn't go and sit at the cinema because I don't go to the cinema because I always fall asleep in there for some reason, and I just thought I'll wait and then I'll stream it or something. I tried to watching it, if memory serves, in must have been about 2011 or something like that, 2012 possibly. And I remember I put it on, and I saw the first scene where they're all around and they were about to start rehearsing with the band, and they're discussing like how he's like Scott's dating a 17-year-old and how everyone thinks it's wrong. And I remember just feeling so depressed. Looking at it, it was just the characters in Scott Pilgrim, they just remind me of all they reminded me of all the worst people I was friends with when I was that age. It just really, it sort of had a very real, it just has something really dark and depressing. And I thought, and I've always for a long time, I've had a sort of a rule about any sort of medium. If I find it depressing or frightening, or I'm just not in the mood for it, or it's boring, I will just switch it off and get on with my life. I started doing that because I'm from the UK, and I grew up watching soap operas. And as you may or may not know, British soap operas are really grim and depressing. They've always got incredibly dark storylines. They're sometimes very violent. Everything's very dysfunctional. And I grew up watching them, and I remember one day, so it's just normal, but I remember one day I was watching a particularly grim episode of EastEnders, and it was about a little girl who'd run away from home, and her mum was on the phone to her about it and asking her to come back, and she was crying and crying and crying. And I was a Canadian flatmate at the time, and he could just hear me watching this program in my room, and it was just this woman breaking her heart, crying. And he shouted up to me and said, "Oh, it sounds like you're having a real party up there." And then I thought, yeah, why am I doing put myself through this every day around when I'm having my evening meal? I've sort of associated with watching these really grim programs. And I just thought, why am I doing this? Because it's just, I don't learn anything. They make me feel bad. And so I just stopped watching them. And, and it's occasionally I'll switch them on now, but really I just don't. And I have the same attitude to all sorts of media. I will, if I don't like it, I'll just switch it off and get on with my life. And that was what I did with Scott Pilgrim when I watched the film. I also but then when I actually saw the film properly in lockdown, I fell in love with it. I powered through and I got over it. And also because I'm a lot older than I was then, that part of my life, it just feels so long and so far away now. I can look at it with the benefit of hindsight, and it's nowhere near as cringe as I actually thought it was when I first tried to watch the film. And then I started to read the graphic novel shortly after I watched the film. And I remember reading that and kind of enjoying it. But I got to the part where Scott and his friends in the band, they're making vegan shepherd's pie, which is fine, but it's to be inclusive. And Ramona says, "Well, which one of you guys is a vegan?" And they said, "None of us are vegans." And it's like, well, how is that inclusive? You're not including anyone. And it's just, I just found that really annoying. And the second thing, it's funny and it shows what type of people they are, but it just irritated me quite a lot. And then there was the bit where which really upset me was the part where it was Scott took Ramona up for sushi, and then they learned that Scott had borrowed Wallace, his roommate's credit card to take her out, and that's just so bad. That's just scummy. He's like his best friend. He's the nicest person. Well, he's the only person in the film, with the exception of Knives and Ramona, who appears to actually like him. And he steals off him, and I just was like, I can't deal. And so I just stopped reading it because I just found it very depressing. I also I think I got up to a bit where it was when he meets Envy, and when they were dating at university, and she sold all the toys and her anime stuff so she could buy boots, like expensive boots, and it was like she was just she was getting really into fashion instead of her old ways, and it just made me feel really sad. Thinking about it, I mean, it's a very believable thing that could happen. I mean, it's actually, because people don't realise this, but the geek to hipster pipeline is a very real thing, and it's very easy to be a geeky hipster or a hip geek, and those two things actually, you can move between the subcultures quite easily, and that's obviously what Envy was doing. Yeah, so Envy was on this path, and it was like, and seeing her through Scott's eyes, it did feel sad, because he started by dating Natalie, who was like kind of a introverted, sweet, like young woman who was into sort of quietly getting on with her own like geeky interests, and then she seemed to have quite a flip in personality. She'd gone like from introvert to extrovert, like almost overnight, and and it just felt sad, as it's like when people change, and they move on and they outgrow people, and it just made me feel quite sad reading it, and so I just stopped. And I thought I'll come back to it when I feel up to it, and but the thing with it though is, even with that, actually, since I started researching this video, I actually thought about it, and I thought, well, we only see Envy through Scott's eyes, and that's how we're seeing it. It's quite normal for people to change hobbies. She'd obviously decided that she wanted to she became interested in fashion rather than anime and toys and things like that, and that was a new thing. Had she changed? Probably not. She probably didn't change that much. It's just from Scott's perspective, she completely changed overnight, and no, I don't think she had. And obviously, people are allowed to get new hobbies, so it's nowhere near as bad as I initially thought it was. When I first heard that there was going to be an anime series of Scott Pilgrim, I also had a very negative reaction to the whole idea, because I just thought, there's a trend nowadays to constantly keep remaking old films and things like that, and I think that it's good if they can put a new spin on things, then it's great. And but when I just heard it was coming out, I was like, I really don't like the sounds of this. I thought it was going to be just a straightforward anime of the contents of the graphic novel, and I thought, well, do we need to see that? Does that even need to exist? Because we can read the graphic novel, and a lot of people have read it already. If you're a fan of Scott Pilgrim, you'll know all about the story about Knives and Ramona and the evil exes, and you'll know all about this lore. So I just thought, this is going to be just flogging a dead horse. I just felt really concerned that it'd suck and it'd ruin all my memories of Scott Pilgrim. So what I actually did was, and this is actually quite different to how I usually behave, because I have a real problem with procrastination where my favourite films and things are concerned. I mean, for example, I'm a massive Venture Brothers fan. I've still not seen the Venture Brothers film, and it's just because I just see it as, I think that's the final nail in the coffin of the Venture Brothers, and I want to sort of pretend in my own mind that it's still going to carry on making it. And so I feel very protective around these artworks that I like, and I just really didn't want to get a memory of Scott Pilgrim being tarnished. And I was just so relieved when but I thought, I'm going to sit down as soon as it comes out and sit through it, and if it sucks, it sucks, and I can make a video complaining about it. And then if it's great, but I really didn't expect to enjoy it, so I just sort of sat down to watch it. And actually, it looked like it was just very much a straight remake up to a certain point. And I was like, okay, it's not too bad, you know. And then I was just so happy to see it just divert into this like parallel universe where Scott's dead, because it really blew my mind, because my expectations were actually incredibly low. And then it was like, no, this is actually great. This is actually a really like clever way of retelling an old story, and I really didn't see that coming. And that's why I really stressed the whole spoiler warning thing at the start of this video, because I think that like you know, spoilers was one thing, but this would actually completely ruin the experience if people figure out the twist, then it really will spoil it. So yeah, so it's a real power move on the part of the program makers to do that, because I didn't see it coming, and it was all kinds of awesome. I've always had, you know, quite a sort of strange relationship with Scott Pilgrim. I mean, like, for example, like in contrast with something like the Venture Brothers or the Mighty Boosh or any number of things that I really liked, and that, you know, came out around the same time as the Scott Pilgrim film. I just loved them immediately. I just saw them and thought they were great. Whereas there was something deeply unsettling about Scott Pilgrim, and so I thought, you know, that's something you know, a bit of a jumping off point in my attempts to figure out what's the problematic message. That said, though, is the good far outweighs the bad. You know, like, especially like one of my favourite features of it is the music. I mean, Brie Larson does an incredible performance as Envy, and I'd love it if she actually started touring as Clash of Demon Head. I'd totally go and see them, as, you know, and if they wrote more songs, that would be just great. But Michael Cera is a ridiculously good bass player. And so what he actually did is he actually dumbed himself down quite a bit to play Scott, because Scott's kind of lazy, and so he's not going to be that great on the bass, and so he actually reduced his own skill quite a bit, and that's pretty cool. And I also think the film, like, I think that it's very funny in parts. I mean, one of my favourite parts is when Wallace Wells is shouting out, like heckling Crash and the boys at the gig. I just find that really funny. And there's also a joke in the graphic novel about the existential horror of Honest Ed's. And Honest Ed's, I saw it and I thought like the building looked like an amusement arcade, but it actually wasn't. It looked like that from the outside, but it was actually a massive department store in Toronto. It actually closed, I looked it up, and apparently it closed like, you know, a few years ago, but it was like around for years and years, and it was just like a huge pound shop. Like it was just full of all this crap, and it was just like, I just found the idea of somebody having existential horror in there incredibly relatable, and, you know, and also, you know, it actually made me laugh out loud looking at the picture and reading it. So that's one thing. I also like found that like this is like the worst ever case of I'm gonna cut in a minute to Christian Bale shouting that's me that is, because this is like the most that me that is moment about this film. But yeah, it's the scene where Scott and Ramona are at this Clash of Demon Head gig, and they are and they just start like, because they recognise Todd's there, and it was obvious that Todd was something to Ramona, and it was just all kinds of awkward, and it just really felt really horrible to watch, because when I was the same age as the characters, I was really into music, and I had a dream of running my own record label, so like Alan McGee or Anthony Wilson. So I used to spend a lot of time going to gigs, you know, and I used to I managed a few bands and things like that, and it sounds like a lot of fun, but I used to feel like crap quite a lot of the time, and I often used to find myself hanging around at gigs just feeling like really very low. And so, you know, just seeing that, it just brought back some really like horrible memories. But, you know, it's sort of, you know, for my memories, and they're awful, but, you know, it's nice to have memories. So I just found that really well observed, and I'm sure quite a few people can relate to that. I mean, you know, trying to be cool in your 20s and being an indie kid, it is difficult, and so, you know, all power to you if you come through it now, because I'm so glad I don't have to anymore.
That's me, that's me!
So when I was thinking about the terrible messaging of Scott Pilgrim, the obvious terrible message is like, well, the most problematic piece of content in that is his relationship with knives. It's something, you know, I think I just need to like address it up front, because I know that that's one of the main criticisms about Scott Pilgrim, is it's messed up. A 23-year-old shouldn't be dating a 17-year-old. Everyone knows that. Scott knows it. The characters around him call him out on it constantly. So it's never presented in a way that's cool. It's presented that he's actually quite sad and he shouldn't be doing it. But so I actually don't think it's portrayed in a particularly problematic way because it's called out in universe. If it was portrayed as it's no way portrayed as an aspirational thing. No one's impressed by it. People criticise him. The implication is that he's only doing it because he's really not in a good way, and that's why he's dating somebody so much younger than him. But it really isn't. Like, his treatment of knives is just really shoddy. The only positive I can say about his treatment of knives is that he wasn't like sexually exploiting her. I mean, I don't think they even kissed until right at the end of the graphic novel when she was 18, although he did make a clumsy pass at her, and so he did attempt to sexually exploit her. He was just really bad at it, and she was actually 18 at that point. But you know, it's pretty slack behaviour. But we don't always have to like protagonists. You know, not just because somebody's like the main character in a story doesn't mean that they're a good person, and it doesn't mean that we should emulate them and stuff. So yeah, I actually think I'm not that bothered about his relationship with knives, because if it was presented differently, if it had been presented as a good thing to do, then I would feel quite different. But then actually going into it, there's something very like upsetting about the whole knives thing, because it's such an irresponsible thing to do, because poor Knives, she ends up like basically, you know, she's so upset she basically stalks Scott for the rest, you know, throughout the rest of the film, and in the graphic novel she keeps showing up. She ends up becoming friends with quite a few of the band, and she ends up with a very nice relationship with Stephen Stills, which I quite like. But yeah, it's not cool, but and also as well, like you know, they give like the sort of the, you know, they let her drink alcohol, like they'll sign her into like bars and stuff, and pretending that she's old enough to be there. I mean, I don't know what things are like in Canada because I've never been, but I know in the UK a lot of 17-year-olds will go to bars and things. It's actually quite normal for people of that age, even though you're supposed to be 18 to go to places where they serve alcohol. A lot of people go to these places when they're a bit younger, like sort of 16, 17. It's kind of seen as okay. But so I'm not really too sure. I don't know if it's the same situation in Canada, but it is kind of weird, really. Like a bunch of people in their early 20s doing like age appropriate activities, and you know, people do crappy things and stuff, and you know, and actually, I don't know. I mean, by befriending her, was that, you know, she's going to stalk Scott anyway, and so actually by befriending her, actually, it's sort of in a way it was sort of protective, but it's still a bit queasy. The only sort of thing about this friendship in the graphic novel, like with the rest of Sex Bomb, is I really appreciated what Stephen Stills did towards the end of the graphic novel, because he actually tells like Knives in no uncertain terms that Scott cheated on her, and he was only with her because he found it easy, and it's so brutal. But it's so needed. I mean, it's one of those like the truth will set you free moments, because she really needed to hear that. And whilst he could have perhaps handled it in a slightly more gentle way, you know, he did the right thing. One person who comes away from like the whole Knives situation, and this doesn't really get mentioned that much because it doesn't appear in the film, and it doesn't appear in the series either. But Knives actually gets off with Kim whilst they're drunk. They have a party, they have a beach party and everyone's crazy drunk, and they ends up kissing when they're drunk, and I'm like, that's not cool, Kim. But even so, I still sort of blame Scott for that, because he managed to mess up these two young women's lives, and that's why they're drunk and getting off with each other, and so like, yeah, it's not good. I mean, so there's a few things like that. I mean, like the whole Knives situation, it's all sorts of problematic. However, I feel that in the series they actually did quite a lot to address it. I mean, it's very meta in certain places, because I feel that you know, like, because the fan base is so like, you know, is so critical about the relationship. I feel that it really gets addressed quite well in the series. And actually there's some of it's very sweet, because actually in the series, instead of having a drunken snog with Kim, instead we've got like the most like wholesome scene. It's like actually probably my favourite scene in the whole series, where Knives starts playing the bass for hours and hours with Kim, and it's just really sweet and wholesome, and I just really like that. And also I just absolutely love the whole personal growth of Knives. I mean, when Scott first dies, and she goes to his funeral, I mean, she's just complete like Scott like stalker at that point. You know, she's wearing Scott's parka. She's got a Sex Bomb t-shirt that she made herself on. I mean, it's really sad to see, but this is all quite without Scott there, she actually manages to thrive. She realizes she's got this musical talent that she develops with Kim. She also has quite a good friendship with Stephen Stills in the series, and she gets to do things like they write a musical. She's also got quite a shrewd business head on her, because she figures out how to get funding from Matty Patel, and so it's a joy to see. I mean, to an extent, I think in the graphic novel, she's 18 towards the end of the novel, and she's just about to go off to university. Scott makes an ill-advised pass at her, and it doesn't go well. But it's really actually she gets a real sort of sense of closure, because she talks about how she's spent a year of her life hanging out with Scott and she's wasted it. And she's just grown up so much over the course of this year, because doing things like kissing Kim and going to the bar and having alcohol and stuff, it actually, whilst none of it's good, but it was a proper coming of age story. It's like, so actually she gets quite a nice arc in the graphic novel. She goes from a little stalker to sort of a sort of competent young woman about to go off to university, and that's really good. So I actually think that in the whole wider Scott Pilgrim universe, I think that Knives actually isn't done all that dirty, but I still feel really sorry for her. It's just not cool. So that's the end of my video. Hope you enjoyed it. Please like, share and subscribe, and see you in the next video. She's just so cool. It's like David Bowie went to a 25th birthday party, and a band Clash of Demon Head plays with like Pixies and New Order. She's really cool, and she just looks amazing all the time. Like, she's just like, she's just cool as so. Yeah, I love Envy.